At 72, I woke up to a storm of bank notifications lighting up my phone. In less than 10 minutes, my entire nest egg $225,000 had vanished. The night before, Derek handed me a glass of lemonade with that warm smile of his, the kind I always trusted. I lay in bed, stunned, the faint taste still on my tongue, while a crushing sense of betrayal pressed into my chest. I had no way of knowing that one drink would shatter more than just my finances. Everything began when I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen was lit with text after text from the bank, each one more chilling than the last. The first said $45,000 had been transferred out of my account, then another for $60. Zero. By the time I reached the final alert, my heart was pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. $225,000 gone, all within 8 minutes. I just sat there, staring at the screen, hands trembling. A cold wave ran through my body, shoulders to fingertips, like my nerves had figured it out before my mind could catch up. The shadows in my bedroom stretched long and thin in the glow of the phone. I told myself maybe it was fraud. Maybe the bank would reverse it. Maybe this wasn't real. But deep down, I already knew. That sick feeling in my stomach, that hollow ache before everything changes, I knew it too well. I thought back to last night. It had seemed so ordinary. Derek had dropped by around dinner time. I made roasted chicken and vegetables, just like he used to love when he was younger. He was talking fast, almost too fast, bubbling with energy over some new business plan. He talked like he wanted me to get swept up in it before I had time to question a thing. After dinner, as I washed the dishes, he offered to make me a lemon water. Said it would help me sleep better. It was out of character, but it felt sweet. I told him I usually had tea, but he smiled warm, familiar, and insisted. I took the glass without a second thought. We chatted about nothing much. The weather. A funny memory from when he was a kid. Then my eyes began to feel heavy, my limbs warm and slow. I told him it had been a long day and I was heading to bed. He gave me a quick hug and said he'd lock up on his way out. Now, sitting there with my phone in my hand, it all started to feel different. How he looked at my phone earlier, the way he paused just slightly before handing me the glass. His questions, harmless at the time, had been a little too pointed. What time I usually went to bed? Where I kept my documents? I shook my head. No, I couldn't go there. He was my son, my only child. I had always been there for him through every failed scheme, every scraped knee of his adult life. He knew how much that money meant to me. He knew it was everything I had to make these final years secure. But I couldn't ignore the sound I'd heard after I'd gone to bed, the floorboards creaking outside my room, that sliver of light under my door. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, I wasn't so sure. Then the phone vibrated in my hand again. Another message from the bank. This one asked, "If you did not authorize these transactions, please contact us immediately." I swallowed hard and dialed. My voice sounded far away. I spoke to the representative. Yes, I confirmed each transfer. No, I didn't authorize any of them. All made from my own device, all properly authenticated. They told me it wasn't a system breach. That meant someone had used my phone, someone in the house. Someone I had trusted enough to hand them everything. I ended the call in silence, the house around me quiet as a grave. It was morning, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like something irreversible had already happened before I'd even left the bed. and I still had no idea just how deep this would go. But I knew one thing already. Like a stone in my chest, I was going to find out. Derek showed up again just before the sun dipped below the tree line. The sky still held a faint strip of light, and the kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and carrots. Dinner was simple, no fuss. He stepped inside with that familiar grin, like everything was just fine. Said he was passing through, wanted to catch up. I set another place at the table out of habit and made a bit more food, just in case. We ate quietly. He complimented the seasoning, said the carrots tasted like something from a restaurant. Reached for seconds with the smoothness of someone used to being fed. Then he eased into talk of a new business venture, a platform to help small businesses get online with less overhead. He spoke with that practiced hope in his voice, the kind he's always used to cover the gaps in his plans. I kept my face still, letting him talk. Over the years, I've learned that excitement can be a disguise. Something bright to distract from what's missing. While I washed the dishes, he lingered at the table, scrolling his phone. He told me the market was shifting. Timing was everything. Said he finally had the right team this time. His words came polished, slick with no details. I nodded and kept scrubbing the plates. I've spent too many years waiting for his stories to unravel on their own. Then he stood up, started tidying, wiped down the table like he needed to prove something. Moved to the counter where my phone was. He slid it over, just a few inches, to make room for the cutting board. It looked casual, but I saw it, and I remembered. He opened the fridge, pulled out the pitcher I kept for iced tea, said I should try something lighter tonight. He brought lemons, had them in his grocery sack, already waiting. Rolled them under his palm to get the juice flowing, crushed mint between his fingers. Added a ribbon of honey. The scent rose clean and sweet. Said it was good for sleep. I told him I usually drank tea. He didn't answer. Just stirred the spoon and handed me the glass. We carried our drinks to the living room. He chose the chair that faced the hallway toward my office. The TV stayed off. We talked about the neighbors, the new family at the end of the block. The stray cat that hadn't been seen since last winter. Then he asked if I still went to bed early. I said most nights, yes. He asked if I kept my phone nearby in case of emergency. I said it stayed on my nightstand. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I asked about his apartment. He said it felt temporary, but useful. Good light, strong Wi-Fi. He didn't mention friends, or furniture, or routine. Then he veered back to work again. Deadlines. Big opportunities. All just out of reach. My chest tightened. His voice had that rhythm, like someone selling hope they didn't quite believe in. The lemonade was sweeter than my tea, left a warmth at the back of my throat, a heaviness in my arms and legs that felt soft, comfortable. At first, he noticed me relaxing and told me I should rest more. Said sleep resets the mind. His own glass stayed mostly full. Then he said something about responsibility, about finally understanding how much I'd carried alone over the years. He said he wanted to lift that weight. His words were kind, almost moving. If it had been 20 years earlier, maybe I'd have believed him. Then he asked where I kept important papers these days. I told him most were stored on my computer now. He nodded, said that was smarter than keeping them lying around. That was when I felt the first shiver of unease. A chill, low and faint, sliding under the door. I pulled the throw blanket over my knees and said nothing. Just smiled. At 9 o'clock, I stood up and told him I was heading to bed. He offered to clean the glasses and lock up, said it with that calm, easy tone he always used when he wanted to be left alone in the house. I thanked him and walked to the bedroom. At the door, I paused and looked back. He was at the sink, sleeves rolled up, head bent over the water. It looked like a picture from any quiet evening in any safe home. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand like I always do, smoothed the quilt, sat on the edge of the bed to breathe. That heaviness in my limbs deepened. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. I told myself it was a long day, that I should be grateful for rest. From the hallway, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard. Then silence. I laid back and let the dark settle. The house was still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you've earned peace. I thought about how many times I'd forgiven Derek, how many times I'd hoped for a turning point. I wanted to believe that dinner had meant something, that maybe we were finally turning a corner. Sleep came like a tide, slow. The last thing I remember was the condensation ring my glass left on the coaster, and the quiet hum of the fridge down the hall. But that quiet was hiding something. And in just a few hours, I'd learned what it really meant. That night, the air in my room felt dense, as though the walls had shifted just a little closer. I slid beneath the quilt, the faint scent of lemon still lingering on my breath. The heaviness in my arms wasn't from age or effort, it was something thicker, like wading into cold water up to my chest. The house was quiet, too quiet. Only the low hum of the fridge broke the silence. I heard the soft click of the front door latch. It didn't open, just clicked once, deliberate. Then a faint creak, floorboards groaning under slow, cautious steps. Those old pine floors don't lie. Every step has its voice, and I knew exactly where that sound came from. I told myself Derek was locking up, maybe checking windows. But his footsteps had a different rhythm, measured, careful, like he was listening for something. Light spilled beneath my bedroom door, a thin strip slicing the dark. It flickered, then steadied. It didn't come from the kitchen. It came from the direction of my office. I told myself maybe he'd forgotten to switch something off. But I knew the layout too well. That glow wasn't kitchen light. Then I heard it, the scrape of a chair sliding on the rug. I rolled onto my side, shut my eyes tight, and tried to focus on my breathing. Steady in, steady out. Tried to pretend it was nothing. After all, my son was in the house. I had always believed that meant safety. Still, I couldn't stop picturing the office door slowly swinging open. All my files were in there. My laptop, the small fireproof box with my will and deed papers. My limbs were too heavy to sit up, but I shifted slightly, reached one hand toward the nightstand. My fingers brushed the phone screen. I didn't pick it up. I just listened. A soft click echoed through the silence. The laptop opening. I could picture the screen lighting up, the login screen waiting. I imagined Derek there, hunched forward, eyes darting, my breath caught in my throat. So many years of second chances. So many quiet forgivenesses. My chest burned with the weight of it all. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. But then came the tapping, faint, rhythmic, keys being pressed. Not fast, not aimless, deliberate. Then the desk drawer, the one that always sticks on the left, slid open. A pause, paper rustling, pages shifting. I knew what he was looking for, that envelope with my most recent bank statement. It was still out, waiting to be filed. The light dimmed again. Footsteps moved from the office back down the hall. The floorboard outside my bedroom gave a low, familiar groan. Then silence. No knock. No voice. Just the weight of someone listening. Then, finally, the steps retreated toward the kitchen. The sound of a cabinet opening. The rush of water into a glass. I tried to reason it away. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he needed another drink. But the unease had sunk in too deep. It wasn't leaving. The light under the door vanished. I heard the soft sigh of the armchair in the living room as he sat down. Then later, the creak of the guest room door closing. And quiet. I stared into the dark for what felt like hours. Nothing made noise, but the house no longer felt still. It felt watched. The lemonade had left behind a sweetness on my tongue, but the haze in my mind hadn't lifted. I turned onto my back, trying to shake the images. The office light, the keys, the floorboard groaning. But they clung to me like stains that wouldn't wash out. Sleep eventually pulled me under, but it was uneasy. I dreamed of winter bare trees, frost-covered beds in the garden. A shadow moved among the branches, careful not to leave tracks. When I woke, just before dawn, that dream was already fading, but the feeling of something missing stayed behind. The guest room door was shut, the hallway dim with early light, and everything still smelled faintly of lemon and mint. I walked past the office without looking in, made my way to the kitchen, filled the kettle. My hands went through the motions of making tea, but my thoughts circled the night. Those sounds weren't from a stranger. They were the steps of someone who knew exactly where to go, what to touch, how to move without waking me. That knowledge pressed down on me as I sat at the table with my tea. I told myself by evening I'd forget the creak of the floorboards, the glow under the door, the scrape of the chair, but somewhere deep inside, I knew I wouldn't forget. Not ever. They were waiting for morning, to show me exactly why they came. The morning light had barely touched the curtains when my phone started to vibrate on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just one message, maybe something from the pharmacy or the community garden group, but it didn't stop. One alert stacked on top of another, buzzing in a frantic rhythm that made my stomach twist before I even picked it up. The first notification came from the bank. A $75,000 transfer processed at 6:07 a.m. Then another $50,000  2 minutes later. Then $25,000. And more after that. Each message showing a new number. Each timestamp piling up like bricks. 8 minutes. In just 8 minutes, $225,000 had drained from my account. I sat frozen, the phone hot in my palm, the screen burning into my eyes. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, matching the tempo of the transactions. I scrolled back up, hoping I'd read it wrong. But the numbers stayed the same. Reality tilted slightly. Like the room wasn't quite square anymore. The floor felt cold under my bare feet as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, and still my thoughts ran backwards to the night before. The lemon water. Derek's sideways glances at my phone. His interest in my bedtime, in where I kept my laptop. The way he lingered when I used my banking app, then the faint light under the office door. The quiet keystrokes I'd convinced myself were nothing. The pressure in my chest grew heavier. I called him. The first ring rang out, then silence. The second call went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't need to. It was unlike him to leave early, especially without drinking the morning coffee he always claimed to need. The only sign of him was a neatly folded blanket on the couch and his duffel bag gone. I opened the banking app, fingers stiff. The balance stared back at me, hollow. Every transaction marked with a green check. Each one approved. Each one marked from an authorized device. The phrase sent a chill through me. The implication was clear. These hadn't come from a hacker halfway across the world. They had come from inside the house. I walked to the kitchen and set the phone on the counter. Tried to steady my breathing. The kettle whistled, but the sound barely registered. I called the bank's customer service line. A soft-spoken representative answered and asked for my details. I gave them automatically, voice flat. She confirmed my worst fear. The transfers had been processed normally with the right passwords, from the right device. No red flags, no breach, just someone who had access. Someone who knew what they were doing. I didn't say Derek's name aloud, but his face filled my mind. The drink he made. The strange heaviness in my limbs. The lemony scent that had clung to the edge of my desk. I hung up. The silence around me didn't feel safe anymore. It felt suffocating. I moved through the rooms, slowly, noticing things I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had, but never questioned them. My laptop was where I had left it. But it had been shut just a little too carefully. The charger was coiled in that tidy way Derek used to fold his socks. I sat at the table, hands clasped tight, knuckles aching. The disbelief still flickered in the background. But something else had started to bloom beneath it. Not rage, not yet, but a slow, cold anger. The kind that spreads in silence. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the bank. This time, it said all outgoing transfers had been halted due to suspicious activity. I stared at the words, not sure if I felt relief or something worse. The damage had already been done, and it wasn't random. Whoever had done this knew me, knew my routines, knew how to walk through my house without waking me. There was only one person who had been that close, who had sat at my table, handed me a drink, and looked me in the eye. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. My breath came in slow, deliberate pulls. I wasn't ready to say the truth out loud. Not yet. But it was forming anyway. And I knew what had to come next. Not panic. Not pleading. Something quieter. Something sharper. Something planned. I stayed at the table a long time. The tea beside me had gone cold, untouched. Sunlight crept across the kitchen floor, soft and deceptive. Each passing minute made the picture sharper. And with it, my resolve. Something had been taken from me. But I wasn't going to let that be the end of it. By late afternoon, the light outside had turned golden, casting everything in a soft glow that felt too gentle for what I was feeling inside. I opened my laptop not for recipes or garden videos but to dig into every corner of my financial history. The screen reflected back a tired woman, but behind the lines in her face, the fog had cleared. I began with the last 7 days. At first, the list looked normal, but then I saw them. Not just the big transfers from this morning. Smaller ones, too. $35 here. $100 there, tucked between grocery bills and utility payments. They went back to months. Always on days I was out volunteering at the community center or running errands. My hand hovered over the trackpad. This wasn't just a one-night mistake. It had been planned. Carefully, quietly. I printed the statements, page by page, each one warm from the printer tray. I laid them out on the table, one beside the next, and drew a line through each suspicious charge. The amounts increased over time, small at first, like someone testing the fence. then gradually larger, once they knew how far they could reach before I noticed. This wasn't impulsive. It was systematic. Next, I checked my email. I searched for anything that might have slipped past me. Buried between promotions and newsletters was a message from 3 weeks ago. A security alert from the bank about a new device login. At the time, I thought it was my tablet after an update. But the timestamp matched the night Derek had stayed over. The night he said his apartment's heater had gone out. I exhaled slowly and sat back. Even the air in the room felt heavier. I went to my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my handwritten notebook. Account numbers ... due dates. Insurance information ... everything neatly recorded. The notebook was still there, but on one page, in the corner, was a faint smear of lemon oil. The same scent from the drink Derek made. That was no coincidence. I reached for the phone and called Martha. She'd been in my life over 30 years. She remembered my anniversaries and the heartbreaks I never spoke aloud. When she answered, I didn't explain everything, just said something was wrong, that I needed help. She didn't ask questions. Said she'd be over in an hour. While I waited, I started writing things down. Everything I could remember. His tone the last few visits. How suddenly attentive he'd become. The times he'd asked about where I kept things. The moments I'd felt tired for no reason. The missing duffel bag. The bank alerts. The exact times of each transfer. It all went onto paper, line by line. A timeline began to take shape. Martha arrived with a leather folder and a box of tea. She placed them both on the table and pulled out a yellow legal pad. As I talked, she wrote fast, focused and neat. When I finished, she looked at me, her face unreadable. Then she said we needed to speak to her cousin, a retired attorney who had handled cases of elder financial abuse. Her words were steady, mine were not, but I agreed. We called him on speaker. His voice was warm, but firm. He asked Martha to send over the bank statements and any emails from the institution. He said proving intent would be hard, but not impossible. We'd need evidence solid and organized. No room for doubt. He told us to secure all my devices, and from this point on, document everything. After the call, Martha suggested we lock down my accounts completely. We spent the next hour on the phone with the bank's fraud department. I changed every password. She recorded each one on a fresh sheet of paper and sealed it in an envelope she would keep for now. The house was dark by the time she left. I walked her to the door. The cold night air smelled like wet leaves. She promised to call in the morning after checking in with her cousin again. Back inside, I stood in the living room, staring at my closed office door. My phone and laptop were now locked away, the chargers unplugged. The silence around me wasn't peaceful anymore. It was sharp, every sound echoed, but something in me had shifted. Whoever had done this thought I would stay quiet, that my age and my nature would keep me still, but I had something they hadn't counted on: time. And I would use every hour of it to make sure the next move was mine. Mine alone. By the end of the week, my days looked nothing like they used to. The quiet mornings I once spent watering plants or reading by the kitchen window had been replaced by phone calls, spreadsheets, and note-taking. This wasn't just about reacting anymore. It was an investigation now, and I was the one leading it. Early Friday morning, Martha returned with a stack of manila folders. She'd just come from her cousin's office and brought updates. We sat at the kitchen table, same spot where Derek had sipped his drink and she slid the folders toward me. Inside were printed reports, highlighted transaction logs, emails from the bank, and a list of steps we needed to take next. Her cousin's advice was clear: no confrontation yet. Not until we had everything lined up. Our job now was to gather and protect, not to warn. I started with the house. Room by room, I moved slowly, notebook in hand. I wrote down the locations of anything that could give someone access: old tax returns, insurance files, even birthday cards with account numbers scribbled inside. When I opened the drawer where I used to keep the property deeds, I found it empty. I wrote that down, too. Then I turned to the digital trail. My phone had already been checked, but my desktop computer still needed a full sweep. Martha's cousin arranged for a technician he trusted to come by the next afternoon. Until then, I left the machine unplugged and the office door locked. I caught myself glancing at the clock more than usual that day. Derek still hadn't called, and that silence said more than words. He was waiting, probably hoping I'd stay quiet, that I'd chalk it up to bad luck or technical error, but that wasn't going to happen. I poured myself a cup of tea and opened my calendar. Marked down every day with suspicious activity. Every time Derek had visited. Every time I'd been out of the house, a pattern took shape. Each major withdrawal happened within a day of him being under my roof. Later that afternoon, Martha returned from her errands with a small envelope. Inside were photographs. She'd taken them herself. Derek's car parked near my bank on a weekday morning. They were time-stamped. I didn't say anything, just slid them into one of the folders. The next day, the technician arrived, a quiet man with silver hair and a habit of mumbling to himself as he worked. I let him into the office and stayed nearby, listening. He moved quickly but carefully, explained everything he was doing. When he was done, he printed a report and handed it to me. 3 separate times in the past month, my computer had been accessed remotely. Each session aligned almost exactly with the dates of suspicious withdrawals. Whoever did this, he said, knew what they were looking for. That night, I sat in the living room with the folder across my lap. Page by page, I read through every piece of evidence. Each document felt heavier than the last. I thought about Derek's last visit, the way his eyes skimmed the room more than they looked at me. The lemon scent on my notebook, the missing documents, the timing, it was all there. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a map, and he had drawn it himself. By Sunday, the plan had solidified. Martha's cousin would draft a formal submission to the bank's fraud division. Once they opened a case, we'd have leverage. We wouldn't say anything to Derek until it was official. No warning, no chance for him to cover his tracks. That evening, Martha came by again. We sat quietly side by side at the kitchen table. I told her I was ready, not just to defend what was mine, but to reclaim it. She nodded and reminded me the hardest part was going to be staying quiet. And she was right. This wasn't surrender. It was strategy. After she left, I walked the house, checked each window, each lock, each drawer. The rooms felt different now, still not safe, but no longer exposed either. I'd found a middle ground, a place I could breathe. I returned the folder to the drawer, slid it shut, and sat with my hand resting on the wood. This wasn't just about what had been stolen. It was about what I was about to take back. Monday morning came with a bite in the air, the kind that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I was already up before sunrise. The folders were spread out on the dining table, lined up in careful order. I had reviewed them so many times by now, I could recall the dates and figures without glancing down. This wasn't just preparation anymore, it was execution. Martha arrived with coffee and a focused look in her eyes. She'd spoken to her cousin the night before. He told her we needed to deliver the evidence first thing. Doing it on a Monday meant the fraud team would have the entire week to act before Derek could sense the shift. We reviewed the documents once more. Signatures, dates, sequence. Nothing was out of place. I picked up the phone and called the bank manager directly. Her voice was polite, but I could hear the curiosity behind her tone when I mentioned the scope of what I planned to bring. We scheduled an afternoon appointment, one where she'd have enough time and privacy to go through everything without distraction. After I hung up, I sat still for a moment, let the weight of the moment settle in. I checked my phone. Still no messages from Derek. That silence had taken on new meaning. He was waiting, or hiding, or hoping I'd stay quiet. Either way, his assumptions were working in my favor. Martha drove us downtown. The bank building rose up, all clean glass and sterile stone, catching the cold light of winter. Inside, the manager greeted us warmly and led us to a small conference room. I placed the folders on the table. No small talk, no explanations, just paper. She opened the first folder and read silently, her brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. Occasionally she glanced up at me, then back down. When she reached the photographs of Derek's car outside the bank, she separated them from the rest. The technician's report went into another stack. It didn't take long before the table was divided into 3 clear piles supporting evidence, proof of unauthorized access, and action items. She leaned back and told me she would personally begin the investigation that day. They'd start with internal audits, then move to formal action once the fraud unit verified the findings. When we stepped out of the bank, the air felt lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, but something had shifted. The first stone had been placed. On the drive home, neither of us said much. There wasn't a need. We had moved from collection to action. That night, I sat in my study with the lamp casting a soft circle on the desk. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote down the date. Then I wrote the words, "First day of official action." It wasn't for the bank. It wasn't for Martha or the lawyer. It was for me. A marker, a line drawn in the sand. The next couple of days passed quietly, but not without movement. The bank's fraud department called to confirm some details. Their tone was careful, deliberate. They never said Derek's name, but I could tell they were closing in. On Wednesday, Martha stopped by again. She handed me another envelope. Inside were new photographs. Derek entering an office building across town. The date was yesterday. We looked up the address together. It was a private lending office, the kind that deals in fast cash and quick liquidation. I made a note to inform the bank first thing in the morning. Derek wasn't sitting still. He was trying to move, trying to shift things before the door closed completely. That night, I stood at the front window, watching the quiet street. I wasn't restless. I was steady. Every step I had taken was setting the board. He didn't know it yet, but time was running out. By Thursday morning, the bank's fraud officer called again. Certain accounts have been flagged. They asked me to verify some transactions. I told them clearly no. I did not authorize any of them. I could hear the gears turning on their end. Later that day, Martha's cousin called. He said it was time to loop in legal authorities. If Derek tried to sell, withdraw, or transfer anything now, it could trigger an automatic freeze. We just had to hold the line, stay quiet, let the trap set itself. I hung up and sat alone in the kitchen, tea gone cold between my hands, and I realized something. This battle wasn't about loud declarations. It was about quiet, deliberate steps no one else could see. Derek thought I was still in the dark, and that belief was going to cost him more than he ever imagined. By Friday morning, the rhythm had changed. The work of gathering evidence had shifted into something more tactical. I woke early, went over my notes again, and laid out the newest documents on the table. There was a rhythm to it now: photo, report, transaction sheet, timestamp, each page locked into the next like puzzle pieces. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. It was the fraud division. They'd reviewed the materials we'd submitted and cross-checked with their own records. The woman on the line confirmed what we already suspected: multiple unauthorized activities had been traced directly to Derek. She spoke with care, her words clipped but certain. They were preparing to freeze the active accounts before the weekend. I thanked her, then sat quietly for a moment, letting it sink in. The freeze would be immediate. It would cut Derek off from everything: cash, credit, assets, and he wouldn't even know where it came from. That thought brought no joy, but it brought clarity. He was about to feel the weight of what he'd done. Just after noon, Martha arrived. She placed a manila envelope on the table and poured herself coffee. Inside were 2 signed contracts Derek had submitted to that private lender earlier in the week. The collateral was personal items I recognized: furniture that had never left the house, jewelry, even a vehicle. It was proof. He wasn't just siphoning money. He was trying to sell what didn't belong to him. We called the bank and spoke directly to the fraud officer again. They asked if we could deliver the originals in person for verification. I didn't hesitate. We made the drive downtown again, this time with even more urgency. The fraud officer met us at a side entrance and led us to a small conference room. I laid the documents on the table: contracts, photos, logs, everything we had traced back to Derek. She read through them carefully, making notes in the margins. When she looked up, she told us they'd likely coordinate with law enforcement before the week was over. We left the bank in silence, but this time, the quiet didn't feel uncertain. It felt like momentum. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer. He'd spoken to a specialist in asset protection. There were legal measures we could put in place fast to keep anything Derek hadn't touched yet completely out of reach. We moved quickly. By that evening, I had signed a series of papers that would shield the remaining property. A trust, one with strict provisions. No asset could be transferred or liquidated without my written approval. And that approval would now be tightly guarded. It felt like locking the last door before a storm. That night, I walked through the house slowly, noticing things I'd once taken for granted: the curve of the stair rail, the corner of the kitchen table worn soft by years of elbows, and coffee cups. These weren't just things. They were pieces of a life built brick by brick. And I wasn't going to let anyone strip them away. Saturday morning brought a short email from the bank. The freeze had been executed overnight. Multiple transactions had been stopped mid-process. One of them was a large withdrawal Derek had tried to make. I read the message twice, then closed the laptop gently. It wasn't the end, But it was the first real crack in his plan. Martha came by with fresh bread from the bakery and a quiet look of satisfaction. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. That afternoon passed without incident. Derek didn't call. No visitors. But I knew the silence was just a pause. He would feel the pressure soon enough. And when he did, the real confrontation, whether spoken or not, would begin. That night, I gathered every document into a single binder. Bank reports, legal filings, photographs, timeline logs, everything in order, chronological, undeniable. I placed it on the shelf beside my desk. Its weight wasn't just physical, it was a record, a testimony. This was no longer a story about a woman who lost her savings. It was a story about a woman who refused to be erased. Sunday morning arrived slow and gray, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. I stood by the window with my tea, watching the street for signs of movement. It had been quiet for too long, too still, and then, just before noon, the doorbell rang. I didn't flinch. I had been expecting it. I walked to the door, glanced through the peephole, and saw him, Derek, hair uncombed, eyes tired, wearing the same hoodie he always pulled out when things started slipping out of his control. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. He gave a weak smile and said, "Hey, Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside, just enough to let him in. He moved slowly, like someone unsure if the ground beneath him would hold. We sat in the kitchen, the same spot where this all began. He wrapped his hands around a mug of coffee he hadn't asked for. I waited. He started with a sigh, said there had been a mix-up with one of his accounts, that his money had been frozen by mistake, that he might need to borrow little until things got sorted. I kept my face still. He watched me carefully, waiting for the old patterns to return. For me to offer, reassure, solve, but I didn't. Instead, I asked, "When did you last log into my bank account?" His jaw twitched, just slightly. He looked away, said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I reached over and set a copy of the freeze notice between us on the table. He didn't touch it, didn't look at it, just said, "This is ridiculous," but his voice cracked at the edges. I told him calmly that the bank had opened a fraud case, that investigators had traced the activity, that my accounts were secured now, and everything that wasn't had been moved into trust. For a moment, he just sat there, still. Then he leaned back in the chair and let out a hollow laugh. "After everything I've done for you," he said. That's when something inside me shifted for good. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. I told him that love doesn't come with ownership, that trust doesn't mean silence, and that being my son didn't give him permission to dismantle the life I had spent 72 years building. He didn't respond, just stared at the floor, hands clenched tight around the mug. I told him he had a choice, to walk out now, or stay and listen to what was coming. He stood, no apology. No rage. Just the quiet deflation of a man who thought he'd always have one more chance. He walked to the door and turned briefly, said, "You think you're better than me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I closed the door behind him, turned the lock, and stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the walkway. Then I went back to the kitchen and placed the copy of the freeze notice in the binder, slid it into its place between the legal trust documents and the forensic report, each page a layer of protection, each one a reminder. That evening, Martha called to check in. I told her everything, every word he said, every word I didn't. She didn't offer sympathy, just said, good, and I knew what she meant. Not that it felt good, but that I had finally stepped out of the shadow of being the forgiving mother. I had stepped into something else. Monday morning came with rains, steady and cleansing. I opened the window and let the cool air fill the house. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone the moment I woke. I didn't look over transaction logs or print reports. I made my tea, fed the birds, sat with the stillness, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace, earned, defended, and wholly mine.